Imagine a man screaming directly into your face. His veins are bulging against his skin, and his voice cracks with raw desperation. He is practically begging for a reaction from you. He needs you to yell back and defend yourself. He desperately needs you to engage in the chaotic storm he has just created. That manufactured chaos is the only place where he feels a sense of power. Now, imagine that you do absolutely nothing. You do not even blink. You do not frown. And you certainly do not look away from his gaze. You simply watch him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a rat inside a cage. You remain completely still, anchored to the present moment. In that exact moment of stillness, a profound shift occurs in the atmosphere. The entire power dynamic flips on its head. His burning anger rapidly dissolves into profound confusion. That confusion then morphs into genuine fear. He suddenly realizes that he cannot physically or emotionally touch you. He cannot read your thoughts, and therefore he cannot control your actions. He is throwing the full weight of his existence at your feet. Yet you are effortlessly absorbing all of his frantic energy like a massive black hole. This absolute stillness creates a terrifying psychological glitch in the human mind. It deeply unsettles the people who witness it. It forces them to question the very fabric of their own reality. Over 5 centuries ago, Niccolo Machiavelli understood this profound truth. He discovered that this specific skill is the ultimate manifestation of power. This is the rare ability to become an absolute void in the face of chaos. Most men walk through their entire lives as obedient slaves to their own reactions. Someone throws a cheap insult at them, and they instantly boil with rage. Someone offers them a fleeting compliment, and they immediately smile with gratitude. They live their lives as mere puppets dancing on strings. These strings are constantly being pulled by every single person around them. Their wives, their bosses, the evening news, and the daily traffic dictate their moods. They walk around genuinely believing that they are free individuals. In reality, they are merely biological algorithms responding to inputs. But there exists a second, incredibly rare type of man. This is a man who has definitively severed all the strings that once controlled him. He is a man who has fully mastered the ancient art of being completely unknowable. When you finally master this stoic art, you become incredibly dangerous. You are not necessarily a physical threat, but you become psychologically lethal to those who wish you harm. You transform into an unbreakable mirror. This mirror ruthlessly reflects the deepest demons of other people right back into their own eyes. You effortlessly become the most powerful person in every single room you enter, not because you are the loudest voice there. You are powerful because you are the only person who stubbornly refuses to play their exhausting game. Today we are going to perform a meticulous autopsy on the fragile human ego. We will dissect the mechanics of reaction. We are going to carefully deconstruct the very same skill that Machiavelli whispered to ambitious princes in the dark stone corridors of ancient Florence. I am going to show you exactly how to detach from the external noise. You will learn how to become completely unreadable to the desperate masses. You will learn how to wield pure silence as a devastating weapon. This weapon silently breaks the will of your enemies without you ever throwing a punch. But you must be warned before we proceed any further. This specific journey is not about simply being a nice person or taking the moral high road. This is about establishing total, unbreakable dominance over your own mind. This is about becoming the sole, undisputed architect of your own personal reality. The harsh truth is that most ordinary people cannot handle this supreme level of internal control. It feels incredibly unnatural to them. It feels chillingly cold and devoid of typical human warmth. That is perfectly fine. Let the rest of the world remain warm, fragile, and ultimately weak. You are here to evolve into something entirely different and superior. Let us begin our descent into the mechanics of the Stoic mind. To truly understand why this specific skill terrifies ordinary men, you must first understand how their minds work. You must analyze the machinery of the weak mind. Human beings are deeply social animals by our very nature. We are biologically hardwired to constantly seek out external feedback loops. For thousands of years, our survival depended entirely on being understood by the local tribe. If you were misunderstood by your peers, you were swiftly cast out into the wilderness. If you were cast out into the brutal wilderness alone, you inevitably died. Therefore, we evolved a deep, agonizing need for group validation. We desperately need to know exactly where we stand in the social hierarchy at all times. Whenever two men interact in the wild or in a boardroom, there is a silent binding contract between them. It is a subtle exchange of energy. The unspoken rule is simple. I show you my underlying emotion, and you must show me yours in return. If I verbally attack you, you are expected to defend yourself. If I tell a humorous joke, you are expected to laugh out loud. It is an endless, exhausting ping-pong match of emotional energy. For most people, this predictable exchange is deeply comforting. It makes them feel secure because it makes the immediate future highly predictable and safe. But what exactly happens when you consciously refuse to hit that metaphorical ball back across the table? What happens when a hostile person insults you directly and you simply stare at them with dead, unblinking eyes? You do not allow yourself to get visibly angry. You do not allow your face to show a shred of hurt. You do not puff out your chest and try to look physically tough. You simply stand there and observe them like a passing cloud. By doing this, you have violently shattered the unspoken social contract. You have completely denied them the vital emotional feedback loop that their primitive brain is desperately screaming for. You have starved their ego. And because human nature absolutely abhors a sudden vacuum, their fragile brain immediately enters a state of primal panic. They instantly begin to fill that agonizing silence with their own deep-seated insecurities and fears. Their internal monologue begins to race uncontrollably. They start frantically wondering, does this quiet man know something that I do not? Is he secretly plotting my downfall? Am I completely invisible and worthless to him? Machiavelli understood this psychological phenomenon far better than almost anyone else in recorded history. He lived his life in an era surrounded by human vipers. Florence in the 1500s was a uniquely dangerous place to exist. It was a brutal environment where speaking a single wrong word could easily result in a rusted knife being shoved directly into your ribs. He quietly watched powerful princes rapidly rise to glory and violently fall to ruin. As he observed this bloody theater, he noticed an undeniable pattern emerge. The princes who were highly reactive always perished. The ones who openly broadcasted their anger, their nagging fears, or even their immense joy died. They were incredibly easy to assassinate because they were fundamentally predictable. If an enemy knows exactly what a man loves the most, they can easily use that love as irresistible bait. Love becomes a fatal vulnerability. If an enemy discovers exactly what a man hates, they can effortlessly use that hatred to construct a flawless trap. But the wise princes who wore an impenetrable mask survived the slaughter. They mastered the art of illusion. They achieved total mastery over the delicate arts of simulation and dissimulation. They were the ultimate survivors in a world of predators. They were the silent rulers who absolutely terrified the surrounding royal courts. They were terrifying simply because you cannot ever build a trap to catch a ghost. This is the very first and most crucial lesson you must internalize. Being predictable is an absolute death sentence in the grand game of power. Take a long, hard look at the reality of your own life right now. Count exactly how many times you have willingly surrendered your personal power. You gave it away simply because you felt a burning need to explain your actions. Imagine your manager sharply criticizes your recent work. Instantly, your biological heart rate violently spikes. You open your mouth and start rapidly talking to fill the painful void. You instinctively try to justify your existence. You say something pathetic like, "Well, actually, the main reason I did it that way was..." Stop right there. What exactly do you think you are doing? You are willingly handing your opponent all of your most valuable playing cards. You are actively showing this person that they hold the ultimate power to completely disturb your inner peace. You are practically begging on your knees for them to finally understand you and validate your worth. It is pure weakness. A truly powerful man anchored in stoic virtue does not ever harbor a desperate need to be understood by the masses. He only demands of himself to be highly effective in his actions. He values results over mere perception. The moment you begin to nervously explain yourself, you instantly put yourself in a pathetic position of weakness. However, when you remain entirely silent, you elevate yourself to a superior position of quiet, observing judgment. Machiavelli astutely wrote that men are generally so simple-minded and so incredibly eager to obey their present necessities. He noted that a man who wishes to deceive will always find plenty of willing victims, ready to be fooled. He was not explicitly commanding you to become a malicious liar. He was sternly instructing you to maintain absolute control over the precious flow of your personal information. Your physical face is an open broadcast of information. The subtle pitch and tone of your speaking voice is highly valuable information. Your immediate emotional reaction is raw, exploitable data. You must instantly stop giving your precious data away for free to everyone you encounter. The specific rare skill that deeply terrifies other ordinary men is the calm ability to endure the crushing tension of the unsaid word. Most normal people feel that uncomfortable tension manifesting physically inside their bodies. A heavy, awkward silence silently hangs in the stale air of the room, and they feel a desperate, burning compulsion to shatter it. They panic and blurt out a terrible joke. They offer a cowardly apology just to ease the pressure. They foolishly rush to fill the dark void with meaningless noise. The truly dangerous stoic man, however, absolutely loves the dark void. He comfortably sits directly inside of it. He quietly watches you painfully squirm within it. He profoundly knows that the longer he allows the silence to stretch out, the more hidden truths you will inevitably reveal about yourself. This is the fundamental difference between a common reactive dog and a majestic silent lion. A pathetic dog loudly barks at absolutely every minor disturbance in its environment. A single dry leaf blows across the lawn and it barks wildly. A harmless car passes by on the street and it barks until its throat is sore. A total stranger innocently walks by the fence and the dog loses its mind barking. The dog is purely reactive to the world. It possesses absolutely zero internal control. It is a miserable chained slave to its physical environment. Now deeply consider the silent majesty of a lion. A lion can casually sit upon a sun-baked rock for several hours, just calmly watching the horizon. It is endlessly patient. It is always waiting for the perfect, calculated moment. A mighty lion does not ever bother roaring at a fragile leaf blowing in the wind. It refuses to waste its precious energy on meaningless, trivial events. But when the lion finally decides to move, it acts to definitively end things. Other, weaker men are absolutely terrified of the lion. They are not merely afraid of its razor-sharp teeth or its physical strength. They are terrified to their core because of its chilling, unbreakable stillness in the tall grass. They live in constant, agonizing fear because they simply do not know when the lion will finally decide to strike. You must ruthlessly murder the reactive dog that lives inside of your mind. You must violently silence its constant barking. You must completely destroy the weak part of yourself that desperately needs to be heard by others. You must eliminate the stubborn part of your ego that constantly demands to be proven right in every single petty argument you face. You must eradicate the anxious part of you that feels compelled to over-clarify things. Just let the masses completely misunderstand your intentions. Let them foolishly believe that you are incredibly stupid or mentally slow. Let them falsely assume that you are terribly weak and incapable of defending your own honor. Let them happily build an entire massive castle of false assumptions based entirely on a highly unstable foundation of shifting sand. Because while they are incredibly busy making foolish assumptions about your character, you are silently and coldly calculating your next precise move. Let us venture even deeper into the complex engineering of your own mind. we urgently need to discuss the precise architecture of a stoic mindset. Within the complex field of systems theory, there exists a fascinating concept formerly known as a black box. This concept is the ultimate blueprint for your mind. A black box is a specialized system where the external observer can clearly see the raw input entering. They can also clearly observe the final output emerging. However, they absolutely cannot see the complex internal workings inside. They have absolutely no idea how the black box actually processes the raw data it receives. Your ultimate goal is to completely transform your mind into an impenetrable black box. Right now, most ordinary men are fragile glass boxes. Every single person passing by can plainly see all the tiny gears frantically turning inside their heads. Someone openly disrespects you in public. Immediately, everyone can clearly watch the fragile gear of your massive ego loudly turn. They watch that ego gear grind against the fiery gear of raw anger. That anger gear then forcefully turns the gear that makes you start shouting like a lunatic. The entire process is horribly mechanical. It is incredibly pathetic to watch. When you successfully evolve into a black box, you fundamentally alter the basic physics of human interaction. Consider this highly common scenario. You are sitting in an important high-stakes meeting with your professional peers. A jealous, bitter colleague desperately attempts to subtly undermine your authority. He sharply delivers a highly sarcastic, cutting comment regarding your latest major project. He wants to publicly humiliate you in front of the team. The pathetic, reactive glassbox man instantly becomes incredibly defensive. He rapidly fires back a hastily constructed emotional retort. He frantically scans the silent room, desperately begging for validation from his peers. The exact second he does this, he has completely lost the battle. He has willingly stepped directly into the restrictive, hostile frame, perfectly constructed by his attacker. The impenetrable black box man does something entirely different. The black box man clearly hears the nasty insult. That insult is merely the raw input data entering the system, but then absolutely nothing happens. The room goes completely dead. He deliberately and agonizingly pauses his speech. He slowly turns his head and calmly looks directly into the eyes of the hostile colleague. Perhaps he just nods his head incredibly slowly, absorbing the moment. Perhaps he casually writes a single word down on his leather notepad. Then, without skipping a beat, he smoothly continues speaking to the room, exactly as if the attacking colleague had never spoken a single word. What exactly just happened in that room? The colleague aggressively threw a live grenade, but that live grenade incredibly failed to explode. It simply vanished into the crushing, heavy void of the black box man's silence. Now the aggressive colleague is the one who is internally panicking and sweating in his chair. His mind races with terror. Did he even hear my insult? Did he genuinely not care at all? Is he silently writing down my name so he can ruthlessly fire me later this afternoon? Is he so vastly superior to me that I do not matter? Did my powerful cutting insult simply fail to even register on his radar? By doing absolutely nothing, you have deeply terrified this man without ever lifting a single finger in anger. This is the essence of stoic invulnerability. This is precisely what the brilliant Machiavelli deeply meant when he extensively discussed the carefully crafted reputation of the ideal prince. A truly powerful prince absolutely must remain totally variable and endlessly adaptable. He absolutely must not ever allow himself to be rigidly tied down to one single, highly predictable mode of daily operation. If you always predictably get blindly angry the exact moment you are insulted, I can easily control your life. I merely need to throw a cheap insult at you whenever I urgently need you to act highly irrational and foolish. If you constantly and desperately seek the warm approval of others, I can completely control your entire pathetic existence. I simply need to cruelly withhold my basic praise until you finally break down and do exactly what I secretly want you to do. But if your internal reaction remains completely independent of my external action, I am totally powerless. Attaining this extreme state requires a profound level of psychological dissociation that honestly feels almost completely cold-blooded to the average person. You must rigorously train yourself to coldly observe your own inner emotions. You must learn to watch your own internal reactions precisely as if they are actively happening to a complete stranger standing across the room. You will still vividly feel the sudden hot flash of primal anger surge inside your chest. That is perfectly fine and biologically natural. You must calmly acknowledge its presence. You silently tell yourself, I am currently experiencing the physical sensation of anger, but you absolutely do not let it reach your face. You absolutely do not let that fiery emotion infect the calm, steady tone of your speaking voice. There exists a vital gap in the human mind. It is a microscopic, fleeting gap that exists precisely between the incoming stimulus and the response. The brilliant psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a man who miraculously survived the absolute horrors of the Nazi death camps, profoundly discovered his ultimate unbreakable freedom, living secretly inside that tiny invisible mental gap. He powerfully stated, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. This is the core of Stoicism. Most weak men possess absolutely zero space inside their cluttered, noisy minds. They are completely and hopelessly fused with their chaotic external environment. You must actively and ruthlessly work to violently widen that precious gap. When you successfully widen that gap, you miraculously begin to slow down time. Have you ever closely observed how truly high-status, powerful individuals physically move through the world? They always move noticeably slower than everyone else. They speak with a slower, deliberate cadence. They even blink slower. Conversely, low-status, incredibly weak individuals are constantly twitchy and overly animated. They nervously scan the crowded room with wide, fearful eyes. They purposely speak incredibly fast because they live in constant fear. They are absolutely terrified of being rudely interrupted by someone more important. They are constantly vibrating with a sickening, low-level anxiety. Machiavelli would sternly command you to drastically slow your entire life down. Moving with excessive speed is a glaring, undeniable symptom of deep-seated fear. Excessive speed screams to the world, I am rapidly running out of precious time. Deliberate, calm slowness powerfully declares to the world, I own time. When you purposefully delay your emotional reaction to a highly stressful event, you powerfully signal absolute dominance over your environment. Deeply consider the high-stakes environment of a tense financial negotiation. The opposing side boldly names a ridiculously high price for their services. If you desperately jump to answer them immediately, you instantly appear highly eager and weak. You smell completely desperate, like a bleeding animal. However, if you patiently wait for 3, 4, or even 5 agonizing seconds of total crushing silence, you instantly force them to begin desperately questioning the actual value of their own aggressive opening offer. They might actually panic and lower the price entirely on their own, simply to escape the terrifying pressure of your weaponized silence. Your brilliant use of calculated silence does all of the exhausting heavy lifting for you. It acts as a massive, suffocating, invisible hand that physically presses down extremely hard upon the other person's fragile chest. Why exactly do weak, ordinary men fear this specific skill of profound silence so incredibly much? They fear it deeply because it perfectly reflects the terrifying, endless abyss of the great unknown. We are fundamentally genetically programmed at a biological level to be deathly afraid of the pitch-black darkness of the night. Why are we so afraid of the dark? Because the terrifying dark perfectly hides vicious, hungry predators waiting to tear us apart. A highly silent stoic man is the exact psychological equivalent of a pitch-black, deeply terrifying room. You have absolutely no idea what kind of monster might be secretly hiding inside there. Is this extremely quiet man a gentle, loving saint, or is he a cold-blooded, calculating monster? Is he a misunderstood, brilliant genius, or is he simply a complete bumbling fool with absolutely nothing of value to say, the fragile human brain absolutely cannot handle this extreme level of agonizing ambiguity. It frantically tries to quickly resolve the dark mystery, and it usually attempts to resolve this deep anxiety by automatically assigning immense unearned power to the highly ambiguous silent figure. We blindly assume that the incredibly quiet man sitting in the corner is the smartest one. We foolishly assume that the totally unreactive, stone-faced man is naturally the strongest warrior in the entire tribe. The amusing truth is that he might not actually be any of those things at all. He might be totally hollow inside. He might actually be completely empty and devoid of any real substance. But that simple, powerful assumption made by the terrified crowd freely grants him immense, undeniable power over their entire collective mindset. Machiavelli deeply understood that in the brutal, unforgiving game of absolute power, outward appearance rapidly becomes objective reality. In this brutal theater, absolutely everyone plainly sees exactly what you appear to be. Yet very few people ever get close enough to truly experience what you actually are, deep beneath the carefully constructed mask. If you successfully appear completely unshakable to the masses, you become unshakable in their minds. And that profound, unyielding belief alone will absolutely make them severely hesitate to ever cross you or disrespect your boundaries. Now I can clearly hear the loud defensive objection rapidly forming inside your skeptical mind. You are desperately asking yourself, but wait, isn't all of this just incredibly toxic emotional suppression? Isn't doing this highly unhealthy for my long-term mental health? Won't I eventually just explode from all the pressure? The firm answer is absolutely not. Toxic suppression is exactly what happens when you forcefully shove the dark emotion deeply down inside and entirely deny its very existence. Suppression is always born entirely from a place of fear. What we are deeply discussing here today is the vital stoic concept of strategic containment. Vividly picture a massive, incredibly powerful nuclear reactor. Deep inside the glowing core, there is immense, terrifying, blinding heat. There is lethal radiation, absolute swirling chaos, and raw, unbridled energy violently thrashing about. But look closely at the outer walls. Those massive walls are built with incredibly thick, impenetrable layers of solid lead. They are heavily reinforced with thousands of tons of indestructible concrete. On the calm outside, the massive building is perfectly cool to the touch. It is completely, eerily silent. It is beautifully structured and perfectly safe. You are absolutely not trying to become a lifeless, unfeeling metal robot. You are actively evolving into a highly contained nuclear reactor. You still vividly feel absolutely everything that happens to you in your daily life. You still deeply feel the painful sting of blatant disrespect. You violently feel the agonizing sharp knife of sudden betrayal. You still intensely feel the burning, all-consuming desire for bloody, ruthless revenge against enemies. But you now possess a towering, impenetrable stoic citadel built entirely around your fragile mind. The massive stone walls of this inner citadel are meticulously constructed from cold, hard logic, deep strategy, and vital purpose. Absolutely nothing is ever allowed to leave the heavy iron gates of this massive citadel without securing a highly specific, authorized pass. When a wild, untamed emotion frantically tries to rapidly escape through your open mouth, the highly disciplined, heavily armed guard standing watch at the heavy iron gate immediately physically stops it in its tracks. The stoic guard forcefully demands the answer to one single, incredibly important tactical question. The guard asks, "Does openly expressing this specific raw emotion actively serve my ultimate overarching long-term strategic goal?" If the harsh objective answer to that vital question is a definitive no, the gate stays shut. The raw emotion is forcefully commanded to stay locked firmly inside the dark walls of the citadel. It is slowly processed in the dark. It is carefully broken down and repurposed to be used strictly as highly combustible fuel. However, if the objective answer is a resounding yes, Then, and only then, do you slowly open the heavy iron gate. You carefully release the beast, but you release it with absolute terrifying microscopic tactical precision. Machiavelli never actually commanded you to literally never be angry under any circumstances. Instead, he brilliantly instructed you to coldly and ruthlessly use absolutely everything in your arsenal as a highly practical tool. Sometimes a highly calculated theatrical explosion of fake, terrifying rage is incredibly useful to your immediate strategic goals. If an insubordinate employee is suddenly getting far too lazy and dangerously comfortable, a highly sudden, violently controlled burst of pure anger can instantly wake them up and snap them firmly back into rigid, terrified obedience. But you must remember that the absolute key word in this entire scenario is controlled. You are absolutely not actually angry just because you foolishly lost total control of your fragile emotional state. You are merely performing the outward illusion of extreme anger. It is a calculated theater for the masses. You are deliberately acting out this dramatic performance solely because it is the absolute correct, precise tactical move required for this specific delicate situation. You have officially become the grand puppet master. You are finally the undisputed puppet master in total control of your own deep, immortal soul. This incredibly rare realization absolutely terrifies other ordinary men to their very core because they know the horrible, dark truth. They know deep down in the dark pit of their miserable stomachs that they are absolute hopeless slaves to their own wild impulses. When they finally encounter a rare man who completely refuses to be a slave to his own biology, they instantly feel a deeply agonizing, completely crushing sense of pathetic inferiority wash over their entire weak bodies. They desperately try to cope with this horrific realization by aggressively calling you nasty names. They will openly call you completely cold-blooded and unfeeling. They will loudly call you incredibly arrogant and entirely full of yourself. They will even whisper that you are a highly dangerous, unhinged clinical sociopath. Let them endlessly whisper these pathetic lies in the dark corners. These are merely weak, empty words that they desperately use to hopelessly comfort their own fragile, deeply shattered egos in the dead of the lonely night. They are frantically trying to falsely frame your towering, impenetrable strength as some kind of horrible, tragic mental defect. They do this solely so they never actually have to turn around and brutally face their own weakness. It is infinitely easier for a pathetic, weak man to maliciously call a highly disciplined man deeply obsessive rather than honestly admitting to himself that he is completely lazy and totally devoid of any real driving ambition. It is vastly easier for a highly emotional fool to label a truly stoic man as totally emotionally unavailable. This prevents the fool from ever having to admit out loud that he is completely pathetically emotionally incontinent. Machiavelli profoundly teaches us to be absolutely coldly indifferent to these petty, meaningless labels created by the screaming herd. He brilliantly wrote that it is vastly better to be deeply feared than to be merely loved. He stated, "This is absolutely true. If you find yourself in the difficult position where you cannot realistically be both feared and loved simultaneously." Why exactly did he make this incredibly bold, shocking historical claim? He said this simply because human love is incredibly fickle and highly unstable. Love is a fragile gift that is freely given by other deeply flawed people. Because it is given by them, it can instantly be violently ripped away. Fear, however, is a profoundly different, vastly superior mechanism. Specifically, we are talking about the deep abiding fear that is entirely born from immense, unbreakable respect and total terrifying psychological unpredictability. This specific highly valuable brand of fear is entirely sustained solely by your own incredible actions. It relies entirely on your own unyielding discipline. It fundamentally does not depend on their constantly shifting feelings. But you must strive to perfectly understand the true underlying nature of this highly specific type of fear. We are absolutely not talking about becoming a petty, screaming, totally unhinged dictator or a miserable petty tyrant. We are absolutely not talking about miserably bullying innocent, weak people just to desperately inflate your own pathetic, deeply insecure ego. We are talking about commanding the exact same deep, terrifying fear as the open ocean. The vast, deep ocean is undeniably breathtakingly beautiful. On a totally calm day, it is perfectly smooth and deeply relaxing to look at. But you absolutely fundamentally respect the ocean with every fiber of your very being. You deeply respect it because you profoundly know that it is impossibly vast, incredibly ancient, and infinitely powerful. You know deep in your bones that the ocean will violently crush you into dust if you ever disrespect it. This highly specific dynamic is what we can clearly call therapeutic darkness. When you are standing directly around a powerful stoic man who has truly mastered this dark skill, you ironically actually begin to feel much safer. Why do you suddenly feel so incredibly safe standing next to the void? Because you fundamentally know deep down in your soul that this man is absolutely never going to panic and entirely lose his mind when disaster inevitably strikes. If the towering building suddenly catches on raging, consuming fire, the constantly screaming, highly reactive man instantly becomes totally and completely useless to everyone trying to survive the terrible smoking inferno. The totally silent, coldly calculating stoic man is the only exact person that you immediately want to blindly follow out of the heavy smoke and into the safe, open air. Therefore, this profound terror that you naturally inspire. It is truly a magnificent, incredibly sharp, double-edged sword. To your most bitter, hateful enemies, this stoic void is an absolute waking psychological nightmare. They simply cannot manipulate what they cannot ever understand. To your closest, most trusted allies, however, this impenetrable void acts as a massive, indestructible steel shield. They deeply know that you are totally fundamentally solid. They know you will never ever break under the pressure. But if you truly wish to construct this massive, towering citadel around your fragile mind, you absolutely must do the incredibly painful, exhausting shadow work. You must deeply look at the very root of exactly why you react. You must violently dig into your own traumatic past. Why exactly did that highly specific, highly petty insult hurt you so incredibly deeply? It deeply hurt you strictly because you are still secretly insecure about your intelligence. Why exactly did that romantic or professional rejection sting you so incredibly horribly? It fiercely stung you simply because you still harbor a deep, sickening, pathetic need for outside validation to justify your basic existence. You absolutely must work to permanently fix the broken, crumbling foundation of your own deeply flawed psyche. You simply cannot ever build a towering, indestructible stone fortress on top of a sinking, rotting, muddy swamp. Machiavelli was the absolute ultimate, ruthless realist of his era. He coldly looked at the brutal world exactly as it objectively was. He completely refused to look at the harsh world exactly as he desperately wished it should be. You must finally begin to look directly at yourself, exactly as you currently are, flaws and all. You must aggressively hunt down your own deeply hidden emotional triggers and permanently, violently deactivate every single one of them. A psychological trigger is simply nothing more than a highly vulnerable, totally exposed button that someone else secretly installed deep inside your fragile psyche long ago. It is a direct access point to your nervous system. The enemy knows exactly how it works. They think, if I intentionally press this highly specific button right here, he immediately gets incredibly sad and pathetic. If I press this other button, he violently erupts and starts a fight. You must forcefully rip open the mental control panel, reach deep into the tangled, messy wiring, and violently cut every single one of those exposed, dangerous cables. Do not leave a single emotional wire fully intact. When you finally learn to walk calmly through the chaotic, noisy world, completely devoid of any exploitable emotional buttons, you become virtually invincible to all external attacks. You become an impenetrable ghost. Desperate, hateful people will inevitably try their very hardest to aggressively press those invisible buttons. They will constantly poke and ruthlessly prod your outer defenses. They will endlessly test your new boundaries. And when absolutely nothing happens in response to their frantic attacks, they will slowly look at you with total, crushing disbelief. They will stare at you with that highly specific, unmistakable mixture of deep awe and pure terror. They look exactly like that because they suddenly horrifically realize that they are completely and entirely unarmed against you. Their cheap weapons of manipulation simply do not work on your reinforced steel armor anymore. We have extensively discussed the immense crushing power of absolute silence right there in the immediate heat of the moment. Now we absolutely must shift our focus and heavily discuss the terrifying power of silence stretched across time. This specific highly advanced concept is known as strategic absence. The brilliant Machiavelli deeply knew that excessive constant familiarity inevitably breeds deep, sickening contempt in the dark hearts of all ordinary men. If you make yourself constantly pathetically available to absolutely everyone who demands your precious time, you instantly become incredibly cheap. You lose all of your natural, hard-earned, mysterious value in their eyes. If you eagerly and happily answer your ringing phone on the very first ring, every single time, you instantly signal that you are highly subservient. You desperately broadcast that you have absolutely nothing better to do. If you are constantly present at every single loud, meaningless party and worthless social gathering, you simply fade into the background. You rapidly become nothing more than just another boring piece of the common furniture. The highly specific, incredibly rare skill that absolutely terrifies ordinary weak men is the profound ability to simply turn around and walk away from a situation without offering a single pathetic word of explanation. We currently live inside an incredibly weak, emotionally fragile culture that is totally obsessed with the toxic concept of closure. Absolutely everyone in the modern world constantly desperately demands ultimate closure. They constantly whine and desperately demand to have one final, exhausting, dramatic conversation. They desperately want to sit down and thoroughly hash out every single pathetic, meaningless detail of exactly what went wrong. They aggressively demand the long, detailed breakup text message so they can desperately try to fully understand exactly why the relationship failed. Why exactly do they crave this closure so intensely? It is purely an ego defense. They crave closure so badly purely because it successfully allows them to neatly package the entire messy story into a tiny box. They desperately want to neatly put that little box on a mental shelf and finally feel good about themselves. They use it to instantly create a comforting fake narrative. They loudly say, "Oh, he suddenly left me," purely because he just wasn't truly ready for a real deep commitment. Or she only fired me because the budget was tightly cut. Closure is nothing more than a warm, pathetic, infantile comfort blanket for the highly fragile ego. The truly dangerous stoic man absolutely refuses to ever give them this pathetic blanket. He violently denies them any closure. He simply coldly and quietly withdraws his valuable presence from their entire life. He absolutely does not angrily block your phone number. He entirely refuses to make a massive, dramatic, embarrassing public scene about his exit. He simply begins to slowly and quietly fade into the deep, dark background. He suddenly becomes highly, genuinely busy with his own massive purpose. His written replies slowly become incredibly short, distant, and utterly devoid of emotion. And then eventually the replies just completely and permanently stop. This profound, deafening silence violently drives the fragile human mind into a state of absolute frantic madness. It is a terrifying psychological weapon. This is effectively the powerful Zeigarnik effect, heavily injected with massive amounts of psychological steroids. The fragile human brain intrinsically remembers heavily unresolved, unfinished tasks vastly better than completed ones. A highly unresolved, extremely silent conflict perfectly creates a massive, gaping open loop deep inside their frantic subconscious mind. The terrified brain violently spins and aggressively spins, desperately trying to quickly close the loop. They frantically ask themselves, "What exactly did I do wrong to cause this?" Is he ever actually coming back to me? Did I deeply, permanently offend him? By coldly denying them any closure, you heavily occupy prime real estate in their mind. You completely set up a massive permanent camp inside their frantic thoughts, living there entirely rent-free. You successfully transform into a terrifying silent ghost that relentlessly and aggressively haunts their every waking moment. In the highly brutal, deeply unforgiving world of cutthroat business, this exact strategy transforms into ultimate terrifying leverage. Vividly imagine that you are currently fiercely negotiating a highly important, massive financial deal. The specific financial terms simply are not right. The weak, overly emotional amateur loudly argues the petty points. He desperately tries his absolute hardest to aggressively convince the other highly stubborn side to yield to his demands. The truly dangerous, cold-blooded Machiavellian operator simply remains entirely silent. He calmly and quietly packs up his leather briefcase. He stands up firmly, shakes their hands, and smoothly says, "I don't think this is for us." And then he simply turns his back and definitively leaves the silent room. He absolutely refuses to even offer a desperate counteroffer. He just leaves behind a massive, terrifying, crushing void in the center of the negotiation table. The totally shocked, panicked opposing party is suddenly left standing there completely empty-handed, foolishly holding the bag. They are forcefully compelled by the agonizing silence to frantically begin chasing after the retreating man. And in any negotiation, whoever desperately chases the other party instantly loses all of their bargaining power. They frantically yell, "Wait, please come back here. Maybe we can easily adjust the overall rate. You have already completely won." In highly complex, extremely volatile personal relationships, this specific skill serves as the absolute, ultimate, unbreakable psychological filter. A highly demanding woman inevitably tests your fundamental core strength to see if you will break. She purposefully pulls away her warm affection, strictly to see if you will instantly panic and frantically begin to chase her. Most completely weak, pathetic men instantly chase her without thinking. They get incredibly anxious and needy. They frantically flood her phone with desperate messages, begging, "Are you totally mad at me? What exactly did I do?" The true master of dark psychology coldly executes the exact precise opposite maneuver without a shred of hesitation. She completely pulls her attention away. He seamlessly and perfectly mirrors her exact action. He coldly pulls his own valuable attention away even further than she did. He instantly aggressively refocuses all his energy onto his grand mission. He powerfully and silently signals to her deep subconscious mind, "I fiercely desire your presence, but I absolutely do not ever actually need your presence to perfectly survive." That profound, crucial distinction is incredibly palpable. The vast, deep ocean of difference directly between healthy desire and pathetic, suffocating need is highly physically noticeable. Pure, unadulterated need is incredibly repulsive. True desperation permanently smells exactly like rotting decay. However, absolute, unbreakable, totally grounded autonomy is incredibly, irresistibly magnetic to absolutely everyone who encounters it. The ultimate skill is learning how to be perfectly comfortable with the high possibility of total loss. You absolutely must be entirely, genuinely willing to permanently lose the massive business deal on the table. You absolutely must be completely, utterly willing to permanently lose the long-term, comfortable relationship without shedding a tear. You absolutely must be totally, happily willing to permanently lose the warm, comforting external validation of the cheering crowd. Machiavelli brilliantly wrote that a truly wise, highly capable prince should exclusively rely only on himself. He heavily relies strictly on the exact things that are entirely within his own absolute, unbreakable control. He totally refuses to rely on the highly fickle, rapidly changing things that are held within the extremely weak control of others. If you physically cannot simply turn around and coldly walk away from the table, you are an absolute miserable slave to the outcome. But if you hold the power to seamlessly walk away forever, you are a completely, totally free man. And totally, deeply free men are absolutely terrifying to the miserable, chained slaves of the world. Think deeply about the highly specific, highly rare men that you naturally respect the absolute most in your daily, complicated life. Do these highly powerful, incredibly stoic men constantly, frantically explain themselves to the angry crowd? Do they ever nervously apologize simply for existing and taking up precious space in the room? Do they ever pathetically beg for attention? The answer is an absolute, resounding no. They possess a massive, crushing, undeniable internal gravity. They are deeply, solidly, firmly grounded, entirely within their own unbreakable, independent, highly structured personal reality. If you happen to gently enter their powerful orbit, that is perfectly fine and highly acceptable to them. However, if you abruptly decide to suddenly leave their orbit forever, their massive planet just effortlessly keeps silently spinning on. This specific mindset is the legendary abundance mindset, completely ruthlessly weaponized for total maximum effectiveness. It violently declares, "My grand, lifelong mission is vastly more important than your pathetic, fleeting opinion." When you ruthlessly, consistently practice the dark art of highly strategic absence, you massively, exponentially increase your own inherent personal value. Basic economic scarcity directly and forcefully creates massive inherent value in the world. Pure heavy gold is incredibly highly valuable strictly because it is extremely rare and incredibly difficult to find in the wild dirt. Ordinary oxygen is absolutely vital to human survival, but it is totally free because it is everywhere. You must rigorously train yourself to firmly be the rare heavy gold. You must absolutely stop being the incredibly common, totally worthless air. Let the frantic, highly emotional masses constantly miss your powerful, grounding presence. Let them endlessly, desperately wonder exactly what you are quietly doing behind closed doors. Stop eagerly posting absolutely every single trivial detail of your private life on highly public, totally meaningless social media channels. Absolutely refuse to endlessly broadcast your every single calculated move to the screaming digital masses. Become a massive, deeply terrifying, entirely unsolvable mystery, right in the very middle of a noisy, totally overshared world. The highly rare, deeply stoic man who stubbornly chooses to share absolutely nothing is always the exact single person that absolutely everyone desperately watches the closest. They obsessively look for tiny hidden clues in his total silence. They frantically, desperately analyze your incredibly rare, carefully chosen, highly sparse words, exactly as if they were ancient holy scripture. You have completely violently turned the psychological tables entirely on the ravenous public. You are absolutely no longer merely the pathetic, weak consumer of cheap, meaningless external attention. You are now officially the highly coveted, incredibly scarce, deeply valuable resource that absolutely everyone desperately wants. Now we must finally turn our unwavering attention to the true, ultimate enemy. The real enemy blocking your path is absolutely not the pathetic, screaming man in the street. It is not the loud, obnoxious fool desperately demanding your attention. The enemy is most certainly not your highly manipulative, totally insecure boss. It is not your treacherous, backstabbing colleague at the office. The absolute terrifying enemy standing in your way is actually you. More specifically, the true hidden enemy is your own bloated, deeply fragile, completely undisciplined ego. Your massive ego absolutely hates every single powerful stoic concept we have brutally dissected and laid bare today. Your fragile ego desperately wants to loudly scream right back into the hateful faces of your many detractors. Your pathetic ego fiercely demands to be constantly recognized and blindly praised by the mediocre walking herd. Your incredibly weak ego always desperately wants to have the final dramatic word in every single petty argument you ever encounter. It desperately, obsessively needs to feel undeniably, objectively right in all trivial situations. The brilliant, ruthless Machiavelli would sternly look you dead in the eye and tell you the harsh truth. He would completely shatter your worldview by stating that simply being right is nothing more than a cheap consolation prize for total losers. You must ask yourself one single defining question right now. Do you simply want to feel technically right in the moment, or do you want to be highly, ruthlessly effective in reality? You almost never get to be both at the same time. To truly master this terrifying, deeply powerful skill, you absolutely must be willing to violently kill your own ego. You must successfully learn to completely suffocate your desperate need to be viewed as correct by inferior men. You must be totally, genuinely willing to temporarily look like a complete bumbling fool to the blind masses in order to permanently win the grand, overarching war. You must sacrifice your immediate pride for total, ultimate victory. There is a legendary, powerful story of a highly decorated, brilliant military general. This great stoic general was suddenly aggressively challenged to a deadly public duel by a highly arrogant, hot-headed, deeply foolish young soldier. This highly disrespectful, highly emotional young soldier boldly marched right up and viciously spat directly into the old wise general's weathered face. The great general simply stood there, completely unmoving like a solid statue carved from stone. He calmly and deliberately wiped the foul spit away from his stoic face, and then, without uttering a single word, he simply turned his back and slowly walked away. His loyal men were completely, utterly ashamed of this perceived cowardice. They frantically yelled out to him, "General, why on earth didn't you just draw your sword and kill him? You are a pathetic, weak coward." The wise, unbreakable general slowly turned back to his emotional men and calmly delivered a profound truth. He coldly asked them, "If a totally mindless, stupid donkey violently kicks you in the leg, do you immediately turn around and frantically try to kick the donkey back?" The stoic general had absolutely nothing left to prove to the world. His fragile ego was completely, permanently dead and buried deep in the dirt. Only his brilliant, cold, calculating military strategy firmly remained. If he had foolishly allowed his pride to dictate his actions, he would have drawn his blade. If he had emotionally fought that totally insignificant, foolish young soldier in the dirt, he would have instantly, permanently lowered his own massive status directly down to the pathetic soldier's miserable, lowly level. By choosing to simply turn around and coldly walk away in total, absolute silence, he permanently remained a towering, legendary general in the eyes of history. This specific psychological pivot is absolutely the hardest part of the entire journey. It is incredibly difficult because when someone blatantly, aggressively disrespects you in public, your biological blood instantly begins to boil. It physically feels exactly like a mortal threat to your very physical existence on this earth. But you must use your cold logic to realize that it is strictly a totally imaginary threat. It is only a perceived threat to your carefully crafted, fragile public image. If you are deeply, firmly secure in your own unshakable, stoic reality, then a loud, nasty public insult is nothing more than totally meaningless, empty noise. It is just hollow, harmless wind blowing through the trees. It only actually physically hurts you if you secretly, deeply believe that the insult might be true. The loud, highly aggressive man who is absolutely terrified of being seen by the public as totally weak is always the exact same man who constantly, desperately acts incredibly tough. He is a fragile actor putting on a totally pathetic play. The genuinely dangerous, highly stoic man who deeply knows exactly what he is fully capable of doing is always incredibly gentle and quiet. He completely refuses to ever advertise his immense power to the totally unobservant, foolish public. This highly specific framework is exactly what we call the true outlier mindset. You are successfully playing an entirely fundamentally different game than the rest of the miserable, screaming world around you. The totally weak masses are desperately, constantly playing the exhausting, unwinnable game of cheap social status. They constantly worry, who looks cooler right now? Who is currently the loudest voice in the room? Who is winning the argument? You, however, are coldly and ruthlessly playing the ultimate high-stakes game of absolute outcome. You only ask yourself one question: did I successfully manipulate the pieces on the board to exactly get what I strategically wanted? If maintaining total, crushing, terrifying silence successfully gets you the exact ultimate outcome you deeply desire, then you must ruthlessly use that silence as a weapon. If offering highly calculated fake flattery gets you the outcome, then you must smoothly and flawlessly use that fake flattery without a single shred of deep emotional attachment. If displaying sudden, terrifying, highly calculated aggression successfully gets you the specific outcome you need, then you must violently deploy that aggression with absolute surgical precision. But you must swear a blood oath to never ever use any of these powerful tools, simply because you emotionally felt like it in the heat of the moment. You must exclusively use them only because you deliberately, coldly, and strategically chose them from your vast mental arsenal. The brilliant Machiavelli was very frequently totally falsely labeled as deeply inherently evil by his many critics. They falsely called him evil strictly because he boldly and violently separated fragile human ethics from the cold, brutal realities of political power. But he was absolutely not an evil man. He was simply totally, brutally, unapologetically clinical. He coldly looked at the messy, chaotic web of human interaction, exactly as a highly skilled, totally unemotional master mechanic looks at a highly complex, broken car engine. He completely stripped away the blinding emotion from the harsh reality. If a highly complex engine is completely broken and totally failing to run, you absolutely do not fall to your knees and desperately pray to it. You do not get incredibly emotionally angry at the lifeless metal parts. You simply fix it. Sometimes the specific required fix completely demands that you forcefully use a heavy iron hammer to smash a part into place. Sometimes the delicate situation strictly demands that you use completely smooth, frictionless oil to ease the tension. The highly emotional, totally irrational people constantly swirling around your life are simply the broken, complex engine. Your own internal biological emotions are nothing more than the tiny, flashing dashboard indicator lights. You must realize that you are the master stoic mechanic in this grand scenario. Absolutely do not ever stand there and pathetically scream at the broken engine. You must completely detach yourself from the outcome and simply fix the machine. When you successfully adopt this profound, terrifying level of clinical, cold-blooded detachment, the people around you will instantly feel it. They will feel a deep, chilling shift in the very air whenever you enter a room. They will deeply, uncomfortably feel that you are coldly, clinically dissecting their very souls with your unblinking eyes. They will instantly feel that you are absolutely no longer blindly playing by the pathetic, weak rules of polite society. You are now strictly, unapologetically playing by the brutal, unforgiving, ancient rules of raw nature, absolute power, and totally inescapable reality. And raw, unfiltered reality is completely terrifying to those weak men who choose to live in delusions. So what exactly is the final, ultimate endgame of this profound, dark psychological journey? Do you simply become a totally unfeeling cold stone? Do you become a lonely, invisible ghost? Do you become a totally isolated, bitter hermit? The answer is an absolute, resounding no. You do not become a victim of isolation. You slowly, deliberately become a master architect. You become the undisputed, totally calm creator of your own vast, sprawling empire. The exact moment you finally stop, frantically, pathetically reacting to the chaotic world, you instantly gain the immense, godlike power to completely create the world around you. You deliberately act, and the entire world is forcefully compelled to react to you. You coldly and confidently set the exact daily tempo. You firmly establish the absolute tone of every single interaction. You gracefully become the incredibly calm, totally undisturbed, completely silent I, standing in the very center of the massive storm. Absolute, terrifying, destructive chaos violently swirls and heavily crashes all around you. Totally panicked, people are desperately screaming. Fragile financial markets are violently crashing. Weak, unstable relationships are dramatically ending in fire, and yet you calmly stand totally rooted in the very center of it all. You are completely calm, highly calculating, and totally unaffected by the noise. This specific highly rare skill is the ultimate bedrock of massive success. This profound skill, the terrifying dark art of Machiavellian silence, and totally strategic ironclad emotional containment, is the absolute prerequisite for achieving any form of true lasting greatness in this brutal world. You fundamentally cannot ever hope to successfully lead other strong men if you cannot even establish absolute ironclad rule over your own fragile mind. You absolutely cannot ever build a massive generational empire if you are easily broken. If a single, totally meaningless, highly rude comment from a complete stranger can successfully destroy your deep focus for the entire day, you are completely unfit for ultimate power. It takes massive, grueling daily practice to master this. Tomorrow morning, someone will inevitably try to aggressively test your new boundaries. A totally reckless driver will violently cut you off in heavy morning traffic. A highly stressed, utterly miserable barista will be incredibly rude to your face. A totally unreliable, highly weak friend will completely flake on your important long-standing plans at the very last second. Your old, highly reactive, totally pathetic emotional wiring will violently want to instantly snap and aggressively retaliate. You must forcefully catch that weak impulse right in its tracks. You must deliberately pause, widen that highly precious microscopic gap between the initial trigger and your final response. Look directly at the hot anger bubbling up. Coldly say, "Hello, anger," and then deliberately, forcefully choose absolute, crushing silence. And then just quietly watch exactly what happens. Closely watch the other person completely crumble under the heavy weight of your stoic silence. Watch their deep, painful confusion rapidly set in. Watch their intense, highly visible physical discomfort as they desperately squirm in the void you created. And carefully feel the massive, intoxicating surge of pure, raw power flood your veins. You feel this massive surge of power strictly because you finally deeply know that you are the exact single person who is in total, absolute control of reality. You are now firmly holding the heavy steel leash of the wild, unpredictable beast. Most totally ordinary weak men are violently, pathetically dragged through the dirt by the massive beast of their own emotions. You, however, calmly and deliberately walk the terrifying beast precisely wherever you want it to go. This is the incredibly steep, highly unforgiving path of the true outlier. It is highly, deeply lonely at first, simply because you are finally leaving the massive, comfortable, totally pathetic, deeply average herd far behind you. The massive grazing herd is incredibly noisy. The herd is highly warm and deeply comforting. The herd is totally hopelessly reactive to every single shadow. But the lonely, freezing path of the stoic wolf is totally, completely silent. The path of the lone wolf is incredibly cold, deeply unforgiving, and totally ruthless. But the powerful stoic wolf always eats his fill in the dark. The weak, totally reactive, highly emotional sheep constantly get eaten by the world. Which one of these two animals are you fundamentally going to be? The specific, highly dangerous skill that absolutely terrifies other weak, ordinary men to their very core is simply this profound, unbreakable realization of total internal dominance. It is the absolute, highly stubborn, totally unyielding refusal to ever be emotionally moved by absolutely anything other than your own deliberate, highly calculated, totally unstoppable internal will. This is the definition of true power. It is the absolute, ultimate, highest form of true freedom a man can achieve. And once you finally taste this pure, intoxicating freedom, you will absolutely never ever go back to being a pathetic, weak puppet dancing on society's strings. If this highly intense, deeply uncomfortable autopsy of the human ego has finally forcefully opened your blind eyes, you absolutely must deeply understand one final terrifying truth. This is merely scratching the absolute surface of reality. This specific, highly filtered information is strictly the only exact part of the curriculum that I can safely show to the totally unprepared, highly fragile public. The restrictive algorithm only allows this because it thinks it is merely harmless philosophy. But there are vast, deeply hidden, highly terrifying aspects of advanced dark psychology that are absolutely not merely philosophical in nature. They are totally, brutally practical. They are highly surgically tactical, and they are incredibly dangerous. There are specific, highly potent strategies of absolute mental manipulation, totally crushing shadow work, and highly advanced power dynamics that simply cannot ever be openly discussed in the public square without facing total censorship. The massive, totally corrupt system actively, violently suppresses this highly specific, incredibly powerful information for a very dark reason. It absolutely does not ever want totally free, completely awakened, highly dangerous architect-level men. The system desperately only wants obedient, highly reactive, totally blind workers. It exclusively wants pathetic, mindless, endlessly consuming slaves to the system. Those totally uncensored, highly dangerous lessons strictly exist, hidden in the dark. If you are currently still listening to the steady cadence of this voice, you are clearly fundamentally entirely unlike the rest of the weak herd. You naturally possess the cold, calculating, highly patient attention span of a deadly apex predator. You absolutely do not possess the frantic, totally terrified, highly reactive attention span of weak prey. If you truly want to acquire exactly what is heavily hidden from the masses, you must deliberately choose to step completely into the absolute dark. If you desperately want the highly forbidden total architectural blueprint for the absolute darkest, most terrifying parts of the human psyche, the parts that polite society constantly pathetically pretends do not even exist, you must actively seek it. You will unlock highly exclusive, completely uncensored, deeply terrifying knowledge that aggressively dives straight into the absolute deepest, darkest, most utterly unforgiving corners of the human mind. Most weak men absolutely won't take this step. They deeply, fundamentally prefer the comforting lie. They highly prefer the totally distracting, totally meaningless noise. That is exactly the entire point of this brutal filter. Absolute power is exclusively reserved for the highly stoic, totally unbreakable few.